G'day, Dave Pettit here with another episode of Season 2 for the Harvestaire pod series. I'd like to welcome in a man known in the industry as the greens specialist. By that I mean, of course, the John Deere fronts and headers specialist from One Shot Harvest, Mr. Kassie Van Der Westhuizen. Thanks for joining us, Kassie.
G'day, Dave. How are you?
Very well, mate. Very well. And yourself?
Yeah, going all right, thank you.
That's great to hear. So now, Kassie, for those who may not know of you, give us a little quick intro about yourself.
Dave, I emigrated out of Africa in 2000, and then we went to New South Wales. That's where I jumped onto John Deere harvesters up there, and I suppose that's where I got the love for harvesters. Spent a little bit of time working for Case, went farming for a couple of years, and then started working for John Deere. As a technician, I looked after the harvester fleet, and then after that turned into a service foreman, and then service manager, and then after that group service manager. And then I took on the responsibility to look after the green harvesters. So we've done training on them, we've done performance issues, grain losses. So for the last 4 years at the dealership, I was just looking after harvesters, which I quite enjoyed and gave me quite a fair bit of knowledge about the green machines.
Excellent. So I mentioned you're from One Shot Harvest. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so One Shot Harvest, obviously my dealership that I was working for got sold out by an international company, and I decided, well, that was a ticket for me to get out of the dealership world and start my own business. So yeah, my wife and I started our own repair business, and then got tangled up with primary sales and the GRDC, and we started off with One Shot Harvest. So we're a company that will do a bit of repair work, but we also specialise in optimisation of the machine. So optimisation, grain loss analysis, and then we do quite a fair bit of optimisation work on the machines. So yeah, that's where One Shot Harvest was born.
So seeing that you are a bit of a specialist for John Deere fronts and headers, our listeners are really interested to understand what you look for when doing a pre-season on a John Deere front.
Obviously, we know when everything is new, it works better. So we go around the fronts and have a look at it and make sure that everything is in a good condition. When the crops and the harvest is presents itself as a good standing crop, we don't need to have everything. Well, I don't say we don't need to. Everything still needs to be in a good condition. But as soon as it starts getting challenging conditions, then that is the time when we need to have all our gear in tip-top condition. So we look at knives, we look at guards, we look at the belts, we look at our bearings, we look at the top cross augers. We definitely look at our reel, because our reel plays a very important part in feeding our material into our fronts and into our machine. So yeah, there's quite a few things that we look at our fronts, and I think from what I've seen going out to the field to go and look at customers and see how they are operating machines, I think our fronts are always lacking a little bit of attention. I've come to fronts where the left-hand side of the front is digging in the dirt and the right-hand side of the front is 2 feet off the ground, because we don't know really how to set the fronts up. We've seen quite a fair bit of times where our reel is running too fast, our reel is running too slow. So yeah, that's what we look at the front part of it. And then from then on, we just work our way back to the back of the machine.
So then moving to the header itself, what are the type of things you check for each year before you start?
If we start off on the feed hours position or feed hours maintenance, we look at our sprockets and bearings on the feed hours. Obviously, we look at our chains. If we run our chain not tension to the right tension, the floor would wear through. If we run our feed hours in the incorrect speed, obviously our wear will be twice as quick as what it is in slow gear. So yeah, we just start off on the feed hours and have a look at wear and tear on the feed hours.
So then, is there anything different to check between the STS and the S series?
No, there's not. And this is a question that I get quite a fair bit. STS is obviously the older machines. I think in 2017 they changed the name to the S series. So the STS was out from 1999 up until 2017. STS stands for single tine separation. And then the S series machine that came out in 2017 still got the same rotor and same principle that it is working at. So the difference between the S and STS machine when it comes to the workings of the machine is exactly the same. So no real big differences between the workings of the machines now.
That's very good to hear for the listeners for sure. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier on about optimisation. Now, it's a big thing here in Australia, mainly because it is the farmer's best interest to get all the grain he grows into the bin. So, in general, what do you concentrate on to achieve this, Kassie?
I suppose if we go back to a couple of questions when you say about one-shot harvest, that's how we picked our name, is we get one shot to do our harvest. If we do seeding and things aren't going right, we can always go back and do our seeding again. If we go spraying, we can always go back and do spraying again. If we do fertilizer spreading and something went wrong, we can go back and do it again. But once it comes to harvest, that is it. We get one shot to do the harvest, and we can't go back and do it again. Once that machine has gone through the paddock, that is it. It's gone. So we need to make sure that the harvest is done correctly. And then when it comes to optimization, over the years, we've seen that we can do a lot of changes on the machines to make it work better. If we think of these machines, they're coming out of America. They're predominantly made for corn harvest. So that is what it is. It's, they're made for corn harvest, and all of a sudden we chuck it into Australia and say, all right, you've got to do small grains for us. So there's a few changes that we make to the machines to make sure that it's working well and working right. If you look at the Condinin reports, we know that these machines are working between $800 and $1,000 an hour. So what we are trying to do is we want to cut that hourly usage of the machine per year. We want to lower that hourly usage. So in order to make sure that we use it for less hours per year, we need to put our ground speed up. And we know that what we've seen over the years is as soon as the ground speed goes up, our losses will go up. And I suppose that's where one-shot harvest comes in. We can put our ground speed up without having our losses go up. We can do, say, for instance, we can harvest at 5 kilometres an hour with a 1% loss. After we've done our changes, we can do 7K an hour with 1% loss, and that will cut our hours back. So there's a few things that we look at. Obviously, we look at our rotor. We've got rotor elements onto the rotor. So on a standard tri-stream rotor, we've got 15 elements that we're working with. So we've got the ability to put 24 elements onto that rotor. On a class 8 and 9 machine, one-shot harvest can actually put in another 9 extra elements. On the class 6 and 7 machines, that doesn't come out of the factory dense pack ready, so we can put another 9 extra elements in there. So with the extra elements, our thrashing is just getting done earlier and better, and it pushes that grain through our concave, so we don't get a lot of losses after that. We also do a lot of modifications on the rotor elements. So, we take the old elements off, we do our modifications, we weigh it, we put it back onto the machine, plus these 9 extra additional elements. And then after that, after the elements, we look at concaves. We've seen in the past that a concave that will work in New South Wales might not work in Queensland, or vice versa. A Queensland concave that works very well in Queensland might not work in WA. So it comes to the concaves, it is up to the customer which concaves they prefer. We've seen that the original manufacturer concave works pretty well. We've also seen that aftermarket Concaves works pretty well. It's all up to circumstances, how much rain you got during the year, how much fertilizer you've put down during the year. Was the finish towards the end of the season, was that a tight finish or was that a cool drying off finish? So all these things has got a big influence on what type of concaves we're going to use in our machines. And then something else that we use for our optimization on the green machines is we do a lot of modifications onto our separator grates. So in the past, probably for the last 10 years, I suppose, I've started doing it, where we do modifications on the separator grates. But now we've gone to a whole complete new separator grate that we manufacture. So we take the John Deere separator grates out of the machine and we put these new one-shot harvest separator grates into the machine to prevent our grain losses from happening.
So if we go back to the machine, starting with the front, can you share with our listeners how you and your team go about getting the most out of it?
Yeah, so the guards and the knife obviously work together. So we want the gap between the knife guard and the knife to be as small as possible. So we need that to be very tight. It's a little bit like scissors when you try to cut paper with scissors. If your two blades on the scissors aren't nice and tight, the paperwork is just going to fold in half and it's not going to cut it. But once that two blades are running nice and tight with each other, you're going to cut that paperwork. And the knife guard and the knife works exactly the same. So if you imagine if you've got a big, large gap between the knife and the knife guard, it's not going to cut the material. It's going to actually just flick the material. It's going to pull it into that gap of the knife guard. And that way you're going to get a flicking motion of the head or of the plant. So it's actually flicking the crop material to the side. So the grain that we want to get into our front, we're actually just losing that. So if you speed that up if you look at that scenario with a high-speed camera, you can see how the material is falling off of the knife and it's not getting cut off the knife. So at the start of the season, we look at the gap between the knife and the knife guard, and we want to make sure that it's very, very tight. So we want to cut that material and not just flick it off. If a knife guard is blunt or a knife is blunt, it's gonna cut it eventually. But there's a lot of moving parts. The plant is really moving when you try to cut it. It's not just standing still and then cutting it off. So yeah, that's probably one thing that we look at the knife and guards before we start our season.
So then how do the fingers and belts move in with this?
The fingers and belts, obviously we look at our belts. If there's holes in the belts, we know that that's just going to be a breakdown down the track. The bearings of the rollers that we're working on, we want to keep these farmers working as many hours as possible without being standing still. Like we've seen some really grumpy customers during the years or over the years. When you get a pre-season done and you try to cut corners and you're not replacing belts, and then halfway through the season a belt will tear, and I can promise you that tear of the belt will always happen on a Saturday afternoon or on a Sunday when you can't get anyone to come and help you with it. So, yeah, that's probably one thing that we look at is make sure the knives are right and make sure that their belts are right as well.
Absolutely. A bit of prior maintenance always prevails. So
that's correct.
Moving towards the back of the header now, you did mention earlier about the feeder house. What is the first thing you check and change?
On the feeder house, normally we'll look at our feeder house drum. So there's a few positions that we can have our feeder house drums in. What I've seen in Australia, apart from corn, on corn we'll probably have our feeder house up in the up position. All other crops will have it in the down position. So that just helps with the feeding into the machine. And then we look at the wear and tear on the feeder house chain. If we see that there's a fair bit of wear on the chain, we'll replace it. If we see that there's a fair bit of wear on the sprockets, we'll change it because we know that if there's wear on it, the chain is not going to disengage from the sprocket, not going to disengage from the drive as quickly and as easily as what it should. So then the chances of grabbing between the chain and the sprockets are there, And as soon as it grabs, there's a whole world of pain when that goes through, and it will break your chain and break a lot of other things.
Absolutely. So now also the high-low gear on a feeder house and the accelerator, can you explain those to us?
Yeah, so what science or maths, I should say, will tell us as soon as we've got our feed accelerator in the low speed, we would think that with a circumference of the pulleys and the belt contacts between the belt and the pulley, it will be a stronger grip when it's in low speed. But I've seen quite a few blockages in the low speed of the feed accelerator. So if you can get away with the feed accelerator in low speed, I would run it in low speed. But I would say the first time that you block up, you're just going to chuck it into high speed and get done with it. People will say we're going to crack beans or crack grain or crack lentils when it's in high speed. When we put it into high speed, I could never really see a lot of cracks that occurs. We do know that I can see cracks when the feed house is in the high speed. Normally I run my feed house in low speed. I'll run my feed accelerator in high speed. And, you can do quite a fair bit of crops without changing it in that scenario. You can have the feed house low and the feed accelerator on fast. You've got to remember, when you've got your feed accelerator on fast, your chain does a lot more revolutions and your sprockets are doing a lot more revolutions. So as soon as that happens, you know that your wear on the chain and the sprockets and the floor is going to be much higher than what you run it in slow. So I like to run everything in slow if I can.
So is the summary recommendation on this there, Kassie?
Yeah, everything is in the workshop manual, in the operator's manual, mate. So if people look at your operator's manual, they can see what's going on and where they need to run it. But like I said, if you run your feed accelerator in slow and you get a couple or three blockages a day, where normally you would burn your belt out at the same time and you need to stop and change the belt, and it will take you a couple of hours to do that, just to put your belt into the fast position and not get any blockages and not get any belt burns. I think that is something that we need to look at. So over the years, I've seen that we can actually change our feed accelerator. It's still John Deere parts that we're using, but we change our feed accelerator from a standard to a tough crop feed accelerator, and that just makes it feed a lot better. So we still run the high and low gear on the feed accelerator as before, but the plates that we put onto the feed accelerator, that double in amount. So I think there's 24 of them, and we changed that 24 to 48 plates. So our feeding is just a lot better in our feed accelerator, and especially when you're into really hard, thick crops. So they call it a tough crop feed accelerator. So when you're in really thick crops and you keep on blocking it up, you can change that and it will make your feeding of your feed accelerator a lot better.
That's some great recommendations there. Thanks, Kassie. So then moving on from the feeder house onto the rotor.
Yeah, so that's what I said before. On our rotor, we can make some changes there. We've got 15 rotor elements on a standard machine. On the class 8s and 9s, we do have the ability to put 9 extra rotor elements into the machine. So it goes from 15 to 24. So when you increase your rotor elements, there's a lot more thrashing area that happens on our rotor. So we've got a very compact rotor, very compact thrashing area, very compact separating area in the S series and STS series. So we need to maximize that. So if we go from 15 elements to 24 elements, we are actually increasing that area by 40%. So we do the thrashing part of the machine, we increase that by 40%. So that's a lot of changes that we can make on our rotor. When someone calls me up and say we've got loss issues, we've got performance issues, that's the first thing that I will go is I will change those rotor elements from 15 to 24. And we, as One Shot Harvest, we've got the ability to put 9 extra elements into class 6 and 7 machines that might have come out of the factory without having the ability to put extra elements on. There's also some modifications that we make on the threshing elements. to make it, I suppose, less aggressive. There's some elements that we replace. Instead of having a rifled element, I will put a smooth element in. When we put a smooth element in, we're not crushing up the material into a bazillion pieces. We're just getting the grain out of the head and presenting it out to our top and bottom sieve, to our cleaning area, without overloading it really. So there's a fair bit of changes that we can make on our thrashing elements as well.
So what would you recommend for that?
Again, it's one of those things that goes from farm to farm, from person to person, from crop to crop. But what I've seen is the smooth elements in our conditions works very well. I've changed quite a few machines to the smooth elements. We do quite a fair bit of loosen in our area, and the loosen is very hard to get out of the burr. And what I've seen, and this is something that we tested a few years ago, we would change from 15 to 24 elements, go and harvest, see what it's doing, and then we would change that 24 elements. We would rip them out and put smooth elements in. And as soon as we put the smooth elements in, we can gain ground speed because we're not overloading our cleaning area. We're not cutting the material up into a bazillion pieces. We can just get the grain out of the head, and then whatever stays in the rotor cage, and we can throw that away, and we don't need to deal with it. The less we need to deal with material towards the end of the machine, if we can deal with all the material towards the front of the machine, the better it is for our machine.
So we've checked the rotor and elements. When do you guys then work on the concaves?
Concaves are a funny thing. Like, I've been to John Deere training, and as soon as you ask them what concaves they recommend, they would never give you a specific recommendation for a concave. And that is just because every farm is different from farm to farm, and even on the farm itself, between paddock to paddock, the crops might be different. It might be how much rain you had towards the end of the season, what the weather was at the end of the season. Was it really hot? Did the grain got fried in the heads? Is it really tough to get out of it? So with concaves, it's our recommendations over the years have changed with concaves. In the past, we used to say we'll have one small concave in the front, we'll have two larger concaves in the back. I've changed my point of view on that now. We want to have concaves that is small enough to knock all the grain out of the heads, but we want concaves to be large enough to get all the grain out of the rotor area. So at the end of the day, it's what works for you. And like I said, we've had some great results with the John Deere concaves. We've had some great results with aftermarket concaves, with helical concaves. It's all up to you on your farm, how it works and how it performs, and what type of crop you are doing, what the humidity is when you're doing it, what the temperature is when you're doing it. So there's a lot of different scenarios, takes different concaves to put in and get a good result out of it.
Very useful to know that it's basically a personal preference there. So now I happen to be in the know, the answer to this next question. Dirk told me you have developed a solution that aids separation in the green headers. Now, can you tell us more in depth about this solution?
Yeah, so like I said before, we worked on the separation area of the John Deere's. For a very long time, I've said that I don't think our concaves are an issue. I think our separation area is not big enough. And if you go and measure our separation area, meaning the green ones, if you measure that open area that you've got in the separation area, and you go to the red machines and you go to the yellow machines, you can see that we've got the smallest opening of all the big brands. So for starters, a lot of years ago, I started modifying the separator grates. I started cutting the fingers off of it to make it bigger. That worked well. And then over the years, I started developing a grate that I can put in where the bars of the grates are sitting on an angle. So the material that comes through our rotor, that's coming through like a corkscrew. So it is coming through the rotor on a corkscrew effect, so it's coming through the rotor and through the separation area on an angle. So the bars that I've made, the separation grates that I've made, it's probably 0.9 of a square metre opening, where our John Deere grates are probably around 3/4 of a square metre open area. So the open area is good if you can increase that, but too much of an open area is also not good enough, because then you're going to overload your cleaning area. So we've increased it by about 15%, I think, so from 0.75 to 0.9 square metres. But the secret of it is the angle of the bars that we've got positioned. So the angle of the bar, as the crop is coming around the rotor, it hits that angle at a 90-degree angle. So it's a round bar, and when it hits it on a 90-degree angle, our separation is much quicker. It's much more intense. As soon as a grain that is heavier than the straw or the chaff, as soon as a grain is going to hit that bar below the centre part of it, it will go down to our cleaning area. We don't have the momentum in our chaff to fall through, because the chaff is light. So the chaff stays into the separation area or rotor area. So we throw the chaff out the back, and it's just our heavy grain with centrifugal forces that will force itself through the separation grates or separating grates. So yeah, the angle of it took a fair bit of work. We've made that probably 3 or 4 years ago. We've tested it in a machine, and we had great results with it. And yeah, I'm pleased to say that we've got it in quite a fair bit of machines now.
That is excellent to hear. So now, any farmers or contractors that are wanting to try your grates, where can they get a hold of a set?
They can contact me. They can send us an email, office@onetripharvest.com.au, or they can give me a ring and we can discuss it. 0459 785 690. We're on the road quite a fair bit, or we're in paddocks quite a fair bit. So if I don't answer, just leave a message, and we'll get back to you.
Fantastic. Now, I hear from the Harvestaire team that you sell and recommend their sieves.
Yeah, we've obviously, if the sieves are a wearing part in the machine, so they do wear away. Louvers, we can lose louvers out of the sieves as well. With us doing small seeds, we're doing quite a fair bit of small seed harvesting around the area. So over the years, I've tried and tested a few sieves, and as soon as I took the first Harvestaire sieve out of the box, I could see that this sieve looks like it's the goods. It's made properly. We can see that there's nylon bushes and anti-rattle bushes in it. And so, yeah, I really like the Harvestaire sieves. In my case, I can say that there's no anti-rattle bushes or nylon bushes onto the original manufacturer's sieves. So, yeah, when I replace a sieve these days, I use the Harvestaire sieve.
So you would say that it's of high quality?
Yep, definitely. I would recommend it, yep.
That is excellent. So what do you then check on sieves and the bottom two augers?
So the bottom two augers, they can wear away, but you've also got to remember we've got the paddle chains coming off the bottom two augers. So in order to adjust the tension on the paddle chains, we need to adjust the augers up and down of the auger bed. So sometimes when you adjust it, if your chain is too short, we can leave a lot of crop material sitting at the bottom of the augers on both of the clean grain and the repeats auger. Sieves, like I said, is a wearing part. So we, at our pre-seasons, we'll pull the sieves out of the machines and we'll look at the wear of the sieve itself, of the louvers itself, to make sure that it adjusts. Obviously there's a lot of material that will go over those sieves, through the sieves. So we need to make sure that it adjusts properly. And something that I've seen over the years is we need to do the calibration on the sieves more often than what we think we need to do it, because sometimes the calibration of the sieve will get out of whack. It will lose its memory. And it's the same as your phone. Sometimes you need to switch your phone off to make sure that it resets everything and everything is working again. your sieve calibration is exactly the same. Something that you've calibrated, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago might lose its memory. So you would sit in the cab and you think your sieve is sitting at 6 millimeters. That's your bottom sieve setting. That's where you want it to be. But in the meantime, your bottom sieve is sitting at 2 millimeters. So what that is doing, if your bottom sieve is out of whack, it will load up your repeats, and then in return your repeats will go back into your rotor, and then you will put more load onto your top sieve than what you need to be. And it's so easy. We sit in the cab and we can look at the numbers that's on the screen, but every now and then, and I'm talking once a week, we need to jump out, have a look at our sieve settings, set it at 10 mils. I think everyone knows what 10 mils looks like, or 6 mils. Everyone knows what that looks like. Set it in the cab at 6 mils or 10 mils, and then jump out and go and have a look at the top and bottom sieve and make sure that they are at 6 mils or 10 mils or where you've put it at, because if it is not, it just creates issues for us to go and chase down. We've been to machines where, the bottom sieve is set at 6, and then in the meantime, the bottom sieve is set at 20. So we can't get a good sample out of it because we don't want to adjust the sieve closer or tighter than 6 mils. But in the meantime, when it's sitting at 6, it's actually sitting at 20. So our sample is actually very horrible.
So there's lots of mechanical parts that we've gone through about checking with the header. Is there anything else that you suggest or recommend?
Suggestions or recommendations, it's just all the calibrations that we need to do. Make sure we do that at the start of the season. Something else that I've seen is leaks that comes out of our machines. It can leak through this sieve area. It can leak through our shaker arms. Make sure that we don't have any leaks. Or the door for the repeats, the door for the clean drain that you open up to have a look at your samples. Make sure they are sealed up properly. Again, if I say we're working with a lot of small seats around our area, if you drive right next to the machine while it's harvesting, you can actually see the small seats coming out of the doors. But once you've pulled up and you go and have a look at the door, you can't really see that there's an opening, but it's only when the machine is working that you realise, oh, hell, I'm losing a lot of grain out of these doors. Don't be afraid to drive right next to the machine while it's working and have a good look at it and see what's going on in the machine.
Thanks for those great tips and recommendations there, Kassie. And also, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
No worries, Dave.
That was a John Deere fronts and headers specialist from a One Shot Harvest, Kassie Van Der Westhuizen, here on the Harvestaire podcast.